get this chapter finished, because the last part of this chapter that we're going to talk about, it's going to be what we're going to be looking at, which is, of course, our cells and organic molecules, looking at molecules we might take in, that we might use, materials that we might make. So, if we think about our cells, and for the most part, we're probably used to something being demonstrated like this, where this is our cell membrane. We've got a nucleus. We've got our chromosomes, all right? We've got endoplasmic reticulum, that sort of thing. And that process that John mentioned earlier, cellular respiration. Does anybody know what organelle in the cell that occurs in? It's going to occur in what was the mitochondria. It's kind of something that's kidney bean shaped, all right? Are y'all familiar with mitochondria in any way? All right. Now, where do they come from?
Where did mitochondria come from? They were eaten by cells way long ago.
It was believed that the theories that we now have, the very first cells on the planet were bacterial cells, and then came eukaryotic, which is what we are. And so the theory is that the eukaryotic cells, they kind of engulfed these bacterial cells, and we're benefiting from them. Because mitochondria, they also have a double membrane, okay? And then they have cristae, which is like a folded membrane. And they produce our ATP. Depending upon which cells of the body you look at, they're more abundant in other cells than some. For example, in heart cells, we have huge mitochondria and lots of them, but say in like a pancreas cell, not quite as many, not quite as big. Now the way that in our cells do nothing to control them. You get your mitochondria from your mom because they'll be in the egg, okay? They're not in the sperm because they get used up. Well, I think last research shows they didn't believe any were there, okay? But in their cell, we carry out the process of cellular respiration, cellular breathing. The way this process occurs, it uses foodstuffs that we take in to carry out the process to make ATP. So, when we begin to look at organic chemistry, these are going to be the molecules that have carbon. They are going to have what we say is a carbon backbone. They're the biological molecules. Carbs, yes, what we think of when we hear that term, the sugars, all right? They have a bunch of carbons, hydrogens, oxygens. Yes, most definitely. They're an energy source. We hear them as being our quick energy source, but that depends on which ones we consume. They're made up of monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Lipids have a bunch of carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens. For the most part, they are not going to dissolve in water, not without some help, okay? So for the most part, they're going to not dissolve in water. Their job, give us protection, like antibodies in the blood, for example, but they also help make up insulation, i.e. the fat cells, all right? Penguins are mostly fat cells. Think about where they live and how cold it is, all right? Physiological regulation, they're going to affect the plasma membranes. They're going to affect antibodies that are made. They definitely make up the majority of a cell membrane. Do you remember what the cell membrane was?
Lipid bilayer.
It is a lipid bilayer. So and don't forget that in a cell, anything else that's enclosed in a membrane is also a lipid bilayer. So the bilayer is a phosphate head, lipid tail, formed into two layers, i.e. the lipid bilayer. They are an important energy source. When we take in foodstuffs, okay, and if we use up the carbs we've taken in, the next energy molecule the body looks for are the fats. So they are an important energy molecule. We have our proteins. Proteins are made up of a bunch of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. At any point in time, you are roughly 50% proteins. Proteins function in a lot of different ways within the body. They're going to help regulate those chemical reactions, acting, for example, as a catalyst. We're going to also learn that proteins aid in the transport of materials, for example, in the transport of materials in the blood. They help provide protection because, once again, they can help with the immune system. Most definitely muscle contraction, because what causes muscle to move is actually termed a contractile protein. They provide structure, keratin, for example, and if needed, note my terminology, if needed, they will be an energy source. However, we do not want to use proteins as an energy source. If the body begins using protein as an energy source, things go bad quickly in the body. The way that the body wants to get energy. Carbs first, lipids second, proteins last. So hopefully in your diets you get enough of the carbs and the lipids that you don't have to use protein as an energy source. Those proteins can get broken down and can go to the cells to make other proteins and materials.
Could you say again how proteins help with protection?
Proteins help with protection. We're going to see them making products for our immune system. We're going to see that they're going to be involved in other chemical reactions for the bodies. And I don't want to get too far into it, but when you get into the immune system and you start talking about antibodies, gamma globulins, immunoglobulins, all these other things, you're going to see proteins be important.
And then like the energy source, would that be like a gluconeogenesis?
Now, when we get into that type of material, when that body actually has no more carbs or lipids, that gluconeogenesis, gluco meaning sugar, neo meaning beginning, the new, okay, genesis being new, we're looking at actually having to take those amino acids that are made up of those proteins, that come from those proteins. The body will modify them to make them like a glucose molecule that it will use as energy. The problem with that, when the body begins to use protein as an energy source, the first place it's going to look for the protein is skeletal muscle. So those contractile proteins that I just mentioned that are important for skeletal muscle to move, they get broken down. If that continues to occur, that muscle cannot recover. The best example I could give you of that, and you've probably seen pictures, seen stories, read articles, that sort of thing about, for example, famines. I'm sure you probably know that in some way, okay? But in the case of a famine, the people do not have adequate food amounts. They may have more of a carb source than they do a lipid or a protein. And therefore, the body doesn't have these other materials it needs. Well, for the body to work, it'll start breaking down the skeletal muscle and take those proteins and use them. And you'll see the pictures of people, and they're basically skin and bones, but their bellies are like really big. Okay, have y'all ever seen those types of pictures? Okay, that's what happens because of the processes and things that are really bad in the body. Lots of fluid is building up in the abdomen, ascites, it's termed ascites, and that's why their bodies are basically broken down. Yeah. So we want proteins to simply get broken down into those amino acid components and go build and let the cells build what they need. For example, contractile proteins. So that muscle can contract. Yep. So the last biological molecule is our nucleic acids. This is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphates. These are our DNA, RNA, and ATP. The